Hey everyone, welcome to Giant on Cloud. I'm Giant. My name is Giant Dattatreya in full. I work at Dell Technologies as a senior principal engineering technologist. I'm also a Microsoft MVP. And today I'm joined by Aravind Sundaresan. He works as a director of engineering at Cloud Assert. So today we're going to talk about probably one of the most sought after conversations, especially around the service providers, on how to enable multi-tenancy on Azure Stack HCI. So Arvind, welcome.
Thank you, Giant. Thanks for having me on your show. It's always a pleasure to meet with you and talk to you about all things cloud and specifically Azure Stack HCI. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Aravind Sundaresan. I'm part of the leadership team at Cloud Assert. We are an ISV and we just completed 10 years in the industry. And as a company, we focus on delivering solutions for the private cloud, hybrid cloud, and public cloud at large. And we have customers across the globe, including service providers, whom we will talk about more later in the discussion. And we also have enterprises, including Fortune 100 enterprises in our clientele. And our goal is to, help our customers in their next gen phase of hybrid cloud and AI as we embark on that era, starting from this year.
That's awesome. In fact, I've had some very close relationships with you as well, and Ravi, and Cloud Assert in general, right? Because Cloud Assert and Dell have worked very closely, as you know, on the Azure Stack Hub, space as well. And I had the opportunity to visit the engineering campus based out in Coimbatore, and I had the privilege of kind of addressing the employees of Cloud Assert. I can say Cloud Assert has really grown tremendously as a company over the last 2 years that I've been kind of keeping an eye on.
Yep, thanks. It was great having you. I heard a lot of good things from my team back in India when you visited there. So yeah, nice to hear.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. So I think without wasting much time, probably we should get started, Arvind. So are you all set?
Yep, I am. Let's get going.
All right. So Arvind, one of the very, very basic question on the multi-tenancy part, right? So when it comes to Azure Stack HCI, what are some of the challenges that you have heard from various customers, especially mostly from the space of service providers, when it comes to some of the challenges enabling multi-tenancy? As you know, a lot of these service providers, especially CSPs, they kind of want to monetize when they actually offer infrastructure as a service. We've seen that how they did it with Azure Stack Hub, and they kind of want to do the similar thing on Azure Stack HCI. But as you know, inherently Azure Stack HCI is not a multi-tenant solution. But where do you see some of the challenges, especially coming from service providers when it comes to enabling multi-tenancy on Azure Stack HCI?
Yeah, I think that's a quintessential question that pretty much every service provider asks, when they embark on adopting Azure Stack HCI and offer it as a service more so for their customers, right? So, like you said, while Azure Stack Hub was built with multi-tenancy from the ground up by Microsoft, wherein like the administrators wouldn't even have access to the tenant workloads, right? Unless and until the tenants were to give them access to it. Whereas with Azure Stack HCI, it's hardware, it's purpose-built hardware that you can get from the OEMs, and then you deploy Azure Stack HCI OS on it. But the operator or the administrator would still have access to the tenant workloads if they were to, offer it as a service to others. So from that standpoint, Microsoft wouldn't classify it as a truly multi-tenanted solution, when you compare it with Azure Stack Hub. But then as a service provider, here I am. I want to make sure that the goodness of Azure Stack HCI and the Azure Hybrid story that comes along with it to all customers that I can cater to. So how do I pitch this solution, right? So how do I make it, enable myself to offer it in a multi-tenanted fashion? So the pragmatic way that they typically go about approaching this solution is two, three things. One is, you got to make sure that you have, when it comes to multi-tenancy, you need to have the ability to offer a self-service portal experience for your end customers to be able to provision and manage workloads, and then ensure that they have access to only their workloads and not other customers' workloads. And they're also able to, within their own workloads, they're able to segment the workloads further to make it secure and defined within the boundaries of each department in their company, and so on and so forth. So that's from an end user perspective. You need to provide them a self-service portal so they can do everything and then still achieve the necessary security measures. Then from a for you to be able to offer Azure Stack HCI as a service and still align with how Microsoft has built it. So from a licensing standpoint, what we see service providers typically do is most of these service providers, they could be managed service providers or cloud service providers. They are partners of Microsoft, and they are typically CSP partners of Microsoft. So they essentially sell Azure Stack HCI via the CSP program, and then so you can sell an Azure subscription to the customer first, and then when you sell as the OEM, also being a CSP, you sell Azure Stack HCI. You can have a dedicated cluster for that customer, right? And then that HCI cluster will then be linked to the Azure subscription that you have sold to them as the CSP provider. And then as a service provider, right, I can have multiple Azure Stack HCI clusters that they can operate on behalf of my customers, but I'll know which clusters belong to which customer. And so when I provide them a self-service portal experience, I need to be able to let the respective customers access their specific clusters and then manage it on a self-service fashion, right? And then leverage the goodness that comes along with the HCI, like SDN and all those other features, so that within their company they can do microsegmentation and isolation of workloads and so on and so forth. So as a result, what happens is, to summarize, the service providers are in need of a platform, a multi-tenant, multi-cloud management platform that offers a self-service portal experience through which they could, essentially onboard multiple Azure Stack HCI clusters belonging to different customers, so that as an operator, they have visibility over their entire, infrastructure landscape, that they're managing on behalf of various customers. But at the same time, for the end customers, they're able to get to the end service portal, self-service portal experience, and be able to access their respective workloads, right, in an isolated fashion, and then go on to use them for their own internal company purposes, right? And that's where there's a gap in kind of providing such a solution, and Cloud Assert precisely tries to address that gap in terms of through our platform called Hybr, which is a multi-cloud, multi-tenanted platform, and we've explicitly addressed the Azure Stack HCI multi-tenancy scenario for service providers in this way.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, so good that you mentioned about Hybr, because I've read a lot of things about Hybr. I've seen it, how Hybr actually works as well. So talking about self-service portal, I know Hybr is the one that's going to enable all of those functionality. So do you quickly want to kind of talk about what is Hybr and introduce what is Hybr to our listeners, and how, in a broader perspective, I think Hybr is also a multifaceted kind of, it can do multiple roles as well, not just one particular product, but it can do multiple things as well.
Yes.
Heard that. So do you want to just quickly introduce what is Hybr to our listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. So Hybr is this, you can simply imagine it to be a cloud management platform, right, at its simplistic level. So what that essentially means is, it enables you to have a single pane of glass experience with self-service, capabilities, obviously, to manage workloads that could potentially reside across disparate, virtualization platforms or cloud platforms. Let's say you have, VMware, you have, System Center Hyper-V, you have Azure Stack HCI, you have Azure Stack Hub, all of these on-premises, all of these resources that reside in your on-prem data centers. And then you could have investments in public clouds like Azure, AWS, and so on. Now, as an enterprise, how do I, gain the ability to be able to manage all these disparate workloads through a single pane of glass experience, and then establish governance frameworks around it, right? And then enable orchestration and automation of the provisioning and management workflows, and then with the ability to extend them to align it with my own business processes, right? And then if I want to offer all of this, in a true cloud-like fashion, how do I cloudify my on-prem infrastructure, right? So cloudification, means beyond self-service capability and beyond the ability to scale. It's also about tracking consumption of your resources and reporting the ongoing usage, and potentially being able to show back or charge back your customers by applying cost configurations, right? So Hybr tries to, enable all of these capabilities in a nutshell, right? So that's the, Hybr story from a cloud management platform standpoint. Now, what has Hybr also evolved to over the years is that, as we saw service providers in particular who used to have their own data centers, which they offer as a service to their local customers, typically SMB customers, many of these service providers started to become Microsoft, CSP partners or cloud solution provider partners. So they started becoming resellers of Microsoft's online services, namely Office 365, Azure, and all of the other things, that good things that come under that umbrella, right? So essentially, Hybr was expanded to also offer a reseller commerce platform capability as part of the end-to-end solution, because we have service provider customers that have their data centers in which they have Azure Stack Hub or Azure Stack HCI or VMware, which they offer as a service to the customers. And then they also are reselling, Azure and Office 365 to the same customers. So ideally, they want their end customers to have a single pane of glass experience where they can provision and manage workloads against any of these, VMware, Azure Stack Hub, Azure Stack HCI infrastructures, and also be able to purchase Office 365, Azure, etc., and then see all of these come as line items at the end of the month in an invoice that they can, make sense out of, and then pay the, service provider, right? So we provide such a self-service experience as part of a platform. And we have customers using it across the globe today. And it essentially used to be an on-prem solution where we used to deploy the solution in every customer's environment in the past. But in the past year, we have SaaSified our solution. Hybr is now available as a SaaS solution. So you don't have to go through the overhead of, working with this, setting up in your data center, planning for this deployment and deploying it and maintaining it and monitoring it on an ongoing basis. Instead, you could choose to, onboard the Hybr SaaS platform, and you could choose, a Hybr SaaS region close to where your presence is. For example, you might be in South Africa. You could choose the Azure South Africa region where we have deployed, Hybr SaaS, or it could be an European customer, and we have a couple of regions there that we have deployed Hybr as well. So depending on where you are, we let you onboard to the, appropriate region, and then, we just kind of, integrate your on-prem infrastructure through our edge agents, or, onboard your partner center, credentials if you are a CSP partner. And then within a matter of minutes or maybe hours, the solution is up and running in, on the cloud, and you can start onboarding your customers as a service provider and offer it as a service. And then for that matter, even you could be an enterprise, right? And you could still use Hybr SaaS, right, as a solution, and integrated with your on-prem infrastructure and offer it as a service for internal customers, right? Either way, Hybr SaaS provides a very seamless and simple way to onboard the Hybr platform and start driving value in a matter of hours.
That's awesome. So Aravind, one of the things that I know this is kind of addressing some of the multi-cloud challenges as well, right? Which is faced by a lot of our customers today. I think one of the biggest ones, especially when it comes to CSPs, is how do I really charge back, the consumption, right? Based on the consumption for each of my end customers.
Yes.
Do you think Hybr is in a position to do that as well?
Absolutely. So, as I said, if I'm a CSP partner and I want to, provide a billing and chargeback solution for my customers, Hybr provides that out of the box. You can purchase Office 365, Azure, etc., and then we generate bills for what exactly the customer purchased. But then if you happen to be a service provider who also sells, say, Azure Stack HCI as a service to the customer, right? And you want to, generate consumption-based, billing bills for your customer at the end of the month, then, Hybr can enable that as well for you, right? So Hybr can, integrate with the underlying Azure Stack HCI infrastructure and understand, how much, what's the consumption of your VMs or your Kubernetes workloads and whatnot, right? That you might run within Azure Stack HCI, track these usages on an ongoing basis, on a, like sometimes even at the minute grain, right? Certain services may be tracked on an hourly basis, certain, more frequently, but we track the usage on a continuous basis and then aggregate the data into daily, monthly grains so that we can present those as reports back to the users on an ongoing basis by applying pricing configurations. So you as a service provider can decide how do I want to charge for my VMs in Azure Stack HCI, or how do I want to charge for Kubernetes clusters in Azure Stack HCI, and so on. And then the system will automatically generate those bills on an ongoing basis and as end of the month invoices, which the end users can then consume.
That's great to hear. Now, coming back to the conversation on Azure Stack HCI, right? So how does Hybr enable or help service providers enable multi-tenancy on Azure Stack HCI? Feel free to share some architectural screens.
Sure,
if you
absolutely.
have slides or anything.
Yeah.
But just want to kind of understand at a high level, how does Hybr solve multi-tenancy challenges on Azure Stack HCI?
Right. Just bring up my screen here in a moment. So, when you want to offer, use Hybr as a multi-tenant platform, Hybr has a lot of core constructs that enable that, right? Because multi-tenancy itself, comprises of several, dimensions. The first and foremost is, in a multi-tenanted offering, you want to have the flexibility to uniquely model how you want to offer your service to a given customer, right? You might want to charge all the customers the same, or you might want to charge different customers differently. You might want to, provide access to a HCI cluster or two to a specific customer, whereas to some other customer, you might want to give access to 3 different clusters. So it all depends on, what services you want to offer and to what extent they can consume those services and how do you want to charge back. Everything could be unique depending on each customer, and you need a platform that can enable you to do that. And how do we enable that? We have built Hybr with standard cloud constructs that enable this multi-tenancy process, such as being able to define your services and define quota for those services. The quotas kind of act as guardrails in terms of to what extent you can consume those resources, right? When you kind of subscribe to a plan. And so to be able to access these services, you got to have plans which are linked to these quotas, and then you can bundle these plans into offers which can then be subscribed to by end users or tenants. So subscribing to an offer or a plan essentially gives the tenant or the end user the eligibility or the entitlement to be able to consume your service depending on what the quotas allow. And then being able to track the consumption of the resources that belong to those subscriptions, and then being able to charge back the tenants based on the unique pricing configurations for each tenant is part and parcel of the usage and billing process. So you need to have quotas, you need to have plans, you need to have subscriptions, offers, usage and billing. All of these come together to be able to uniquely model the services and offer it to each tenant in a multi-tenanted fashion, right? So take the example of a service provider that is offering HCI as a service, right? They would, they probably have sold 2 clusters to a particular customer and then 3 other clusters to another customer. And then they have agreed to a certain pricing terms with one customer and a different pricing terms with another customer. Then with Hybr, you would be able to, as part of the quota settings, define for a given tenant, which clusters they would have access to, and then you create another quota which will define the 3 clusters that the other tenant would have access to, and then those quotas will also define the pricing configurations that will be applicable to each of these tenants, right? So that way, Hybr can enable the service provider to exactly let their tenants have access to what they need to access, as well as charge them back depending on what the agreed pricing terms were. This is one example of how you would use these constructs to achieve that goal. And then from a multi-tenancy standpoint, it is also about how seamless is your platform, from enabling people to bring their own identities and then access the portal, right? So you don't want the onboarding of the users to be a pain. You want it to be as seamless as possible. So imagine the same service provider scenario I talked about, right? You have, let's say, 2 customers, belonging to, say, Pepsi and Coke as 2 different companies, and these are customers of the service provider. You don't want Pepsi and Coke employees to come in and then give their emails or whatever, and then somebody in the service provider support team goes and onboards them one by one. Instead, you want to be able to have Coke and Pepsi bring their Active Directories, or if they have an AAD tenant, just simply bring them integrated with the Hybr platform and start accessing the self-service portal seamlessly, right? So Hybr enables that. You could integrate with several Active Directory tenants, be it Azure Active Directory based, or it could be on-prem Active Directories exposed via Enterprise ADFS. Hybr supports any of these types of identity providers. In fact, Hybr can even integrate with other identity provider solutions like Keycloak, and we even integrate with Identity Server to integrate with any other SAML token-based authentication provider. So yeah, there's pretty much any type of authentication mechanism can be supported, when you want to authenticate the users and let them access the platform. So this is another key aspect of multi-tenancy. The other key aspect of multi-tenancy is obviously once you have access to a particular cluster, let's say, I as a customer, Pepsi, have access to two HCI clusters. Now, as a company, I have several departments, and I don't want everybody having access to everything. I want to be able to isolate the workloads by department or by business units or by teams or projects, whatever the case may be. How do I do that, right? That's where the software-defined networking capabilities that are available as part of Azure Stack HCI can really come in handy. And Hybr really, brings out all the goodness of the software-defined networking capabilities as part of a self-service experience in which the tenants can go create their own virtual networks. They can define, a network security group like access control lists, and then be able to do micro-segmentation of the workloads that they provision and ensure that, workloads belonging to a department are isolated within their own VNets and so on, right? So all of these are enabled through Hybr. And these are three different dimensions in which we enable multi-tenancy as part of Hybr.
That is awesome. That is awesome. All right. So just moving on. We've been hearing a lot about Azure Arc. The reason why I bring Azure Arc into the equation is today Azure Arc has become an industry standard, where I've seen a lot of customers increasingly use Azure Arc. So Azure Arc, for those of you who do not know, it basically stitches your resources that live outside of Azure. So they you have the ability to surface these non-Azure resources and bring them into Azure, not move them, but you just surface them into Azure, and you manage these resources just like you would manage an Azure resource. So that's a very, very powerful feature, which has really attracted a lot of customers, and customers are loving it. So how do you Aravind, I'm not sure comparison is the right word, or will it compare or
side by side,
complement? Right? So I'm trying to understand, how does Hybr work in conjunction with Azure Arc?
Sure. There are a couple of things that I would want to call out there, right? One of the things is, though it's not a comparison, just wanted to, distinguish a few things here. The first and foremost thing to understand is Hybr and Azure Arc can coexist, right? Like you said, Arc is a great, value to customers, who are familiar with Azure portal, Azure public cloud portal, and then they want to get the goodness of things that come in Azure portal, like, Azure policy, Azure monitor, Azure backups and whatnot. And then they want to be able to bring all those great services to their on-prem Azure Stack HCI workloads. Then Azure Arc enables that precisely through the Azure portal. Now, how does Hybr fit in with Azure Arc, and how can they coexist and so on? Like, there are a few things here, right? I mean, again, every customer is different. They would have their own preferences. We have had customers that have chosen to have Azure Arc as well enabled, and they also have Hybr. And in some cases, they said, hey, you know what? I want to provision and manage all my workloads just using Azure Arc in Azure portal, and I want to use Hybr primarily for tracking the metrics and doing the billing, right, with the Hybr portal. Whereas some other customers have chosen, hey, I want to be able to provision I want to give the freedom to my customers or end users to either provision from the Azure portal via Arc or through the Hybr portal. And irrespective of where they provision from, they should be able to view the resources both in the Azure portal and in the Hybr portal. And with Hybr, obviously, they're able to do more in terms of, if they want to optionally include approval workflows while provisioning some special workloads, they can do that. If they want to, obviously track the consumption of resources on an ongoing basis, they can do that. They can get to see the end of the month invoices. They can get to also see the metrics related reports, such as, what is the CPU utilization, and all that, right? Of course, Azure Monitor also does that, but Hybr also has similar, metrics and trends that you can slice and dice using a rich dashboard and reporting experience. So depending on the customer context, you could choose and use Arc and Hybr, accordingly, right? It really boils down to what the customer's preferences are. But we want to, make sure that we can coexist with Arc. And so, for example, when we provision resources via the Hybr portal, when you create a Kubernetes cluster, you can enable Arc integration in the Hybr portal for those resources, so that when they go to the Azure portal, they can see those Kubernetes clusters automatically, right? Rather than trying to do some extra steps somewhere else to enable Arc integration, it's built in within the Hybr portal itself. So similarly, when you provision a resource in Azure Arc, and if you have done the necessary plumbing to integrate your Hybr infrastructure with your clusters and Azure Arc properly, then Hybr can automatically sync the resources being provisioned by Azure Arc to the corresponding tenant user and then let them see it as well as the Hybr portal, right? So all that underlying sync and mechanisms that are needed to seamlessly enable you to manage these resources from either of these portals are already in place, and customer can use that option if that's
that's great to hear. In fact, the way you're complementing with the Azure Arc features as well, that's really nice, especially onboarding with Azure Arc, agents being deployed using Hybr. It's fascinating. Now, talking about Azure Arc, obviously you can't get away not talking about the next version of Azure Stack HCI, which is 23H2, right? There's been, as you know, there's been a paradigm shift the way Azure Stack HCI is going to be deployed and managed. So all this while customers were using Windows Admin Center as a de facto tool. Now, in the future, soon, come March or maybe March timeframe.
We did see the notification about 23H2 being generally available yesterday. So yesterday or today, I don't remember when I saw, but yeah, in the last 24 hours, I saw the general availability notification of 23H2. So it's very much here.
That's awesome. So once 23H2 is here, everything will be managed from Azure portal. So now how do you see Hybr kind of evolving to kind of, again, complement with the new features and functionalities of 23H2?
Right. Like I said, right, with irrespective of what's coming in 23H2, to touch upon 23H2 in specific, like you said, a lot of investments that have happened in 23H2 are about how easy it is for you to provision and deploy your Azure Stack HCI clusters from the ground up, right? So, like you said, originally you got to either use PowerShell or use Windows Admin Center to set up your clusters, and then integrate it with Azure, or deploy a KSHCI and all that. But now everything's going to be simple. You can just go to the Azure portal itself and then be able to deploy your HCI clusters and all that, right? So it's going to be making a lot of simplification, particularly for the operators, to build the underlying infrastructure in HCI and then create these clusters and so on and so forth. Now, when it comes to the end user experience, once you got the underlying HCI infrastructure in place, then the end users need to be able to consume HCI, right? Consume the infrastructure capabilities, be able to provision VMs, be able to provision Kubernetes workloads, be able to probably, use the VDI features or SQL, features available in HCI and all of that. Now, for that, they still need a end user portal experience, like we just spoke about. And if you are a, be it a service provider or an enterprise, you want to be able to define quotas that can restrict people in terms of to what extent they can consume these services and who can do what. And then, whether they need to be any approvals or not. And then, of course, the need for tracking consumption and reporting that on an ongoing basis and generating bills at the end of the month. All of these, capabilities still remain the same. And so Hybr will continue to, fulfill all of those capabilities as part of that. But at the same time, we also recognize that 23H2 also is going to, come up with other, improvements, right? So in terms of more services getting added to Azure Stack HCI, more improvements on the SDN features and all that. So we are going to keep, Hybr also up to date in terms of bringing all those goodness through the Hybr portal as well. Because as I said, we have customers, different customers think differently in terms of what their end user experience should be. And so there are people that will say, I'll only use, Azure portal via Arc to provision and manage workloads, but I need Hybr to enable just the, metrics tracking and reporting and billing aspects, right? And then there will be another class of customers that will say, I want to be able to seamlessly provision through Hybr and Arc, and I want both of them to coexist and work together. And there are rare scenarios where the customer might not want to use Arc for whatever reasons, and then they just want to use Hybr as the only portal. And the cases where we see that is, think of a customer that has invested in disparate, on-prem infrastructures. They don't just have Azure Stack HCI. They also have, VMware and some legacy Hyper-V system center-based workloads. Now, if they want to manage all of those and offer them as a service in a self-service portal experience, they could choose Hybr to offer that experience. And they would want the custom end users to just use Hybr as the one portal from which they consume all of these services and then be able to manage them, right? So in such cases, they might even restrict the users from using Azure Arc. It kind of depends on the customer context. There's nothing right or wrong as to what you need to do. But whatever the scenario is, we are able to adapt Hybr in terms of, what features to enable for the customer and what features to turn off for a given customer, and then make it coexist with Arc, accordingly.
Yeah, so I kind of really like your approach, probably taking the approach of more of kind of complementing all
Yep.
of the feature functionalities of Microsoft Azure Stack HCI rather than doing a compete posture, right?
Yep.
Which makes sense, right? So that's exactly what customers are also looking at. It's good to hear. Now,
Thank you.
just in the interest of time, Arvind.
Yep.
So for those of you who want to really see how things are put into action, maybe do you want to just quickly do some live demos maybe and see how Hybr is put into action, enabling
Yep.
multi-tenancy on Azure Stack HCI? Awesome.
Absolutely. I would love to. All right. So demo times. So we'll try to give a quick, breezy demo of to give you a look at, feel for how the user experience is with Hybr, particularly if you're going to manage your Azure Stack HCI clusters through Hybr and offer it as a service to your end users. Then what are the things that you got to do to enable that as an operator? And then what's the experience for the end users when you go about doing that, right? So let's try to go through that process a little bit here. So one of the first things that you do as an operator to integrate Hybr with your on-prem HCI clusters is to go to the admin endpoint of Hybr. I have a demo environment here called demo.admin.hybr.com. This is the admin specific portal endpoint of Hybr. And I go to vConnect and connections and choose Azure Stack HCI. Obviously you see there are various platforms that you can integrate with in Hybr. And right now we are focusing on adding your Azure Stack HCI clusters to Hybr. And I have several clusters, or rather several connections already created here to my on-prem lab infrastructure for Azure Stack HCI. You see that there are several connections to the same cluster itself. So, and that could be, then there could be reasons to do that, because sometimes you want to offer the same cluster as a service to different departments in your company, and you might want to control different quota settings for different departments. So you could still have connections to the same cluster, but define different quota settings and so on. So you create different connections. But otherwise, it's enough to create just one connection to a cluster, at a minimum, right? And so you see here there are various clusters that I have. And what is a cluster, or rather, what is a connection to a cluster about, right? It's essentially the endpoint of your cluster. You provide the fully qualified domain name of your cluster, or it could be simply an IP address. And then you provide the domain name with which the cluster is integrated with, and then you provide an administrative credential to access that cluster. Because remember, we are on the operators portal, and as an operator, you need to have administrative privileges to perform administrative operations on your underlying HCI cluster, right? So that's why you provide all of these credentials, and then you can go on to say whether you want to enable this cluster for provisioning for end users. What are the features you want to turn on or off in this against this cluster. For example, if your underlying cluster has AKS enabled in it, or it has SDN enabled in it, then you can turn on those features in Hybr as well, so that this dictates what services will be enabled for your end users as well eventually, right? And once you've done that, the next thing that you would do as an operator is to decide what kind of workloads you want your end users to be able to provision. Again, this could again be contextual. So maybe for a certain department, which is a R&D department, for dev test purposes, you might give them all sorts of templates and let them do all sorts of things. Whereas if it's a production environment or a production cluster, you might want to be very restrictive in terms of what kind of workloads you allow to be provisioned, or even whether you want to allow provisioning of anything rather than just managing the existing ones, right? So to control that, you get to define each and every think of the all types of VM images you want to allow provisioning against, right? And these could be Kubernetes based images, these could be simple Windows or Linux flavored based images, but you onboard each and every single type of image that you want to offer as a service. I'm not going to go into the details of all of this. There's a detailed demo available, recording available that we can give you access to at the end of the session, and you can go through the whole experience in leisure. But just to give you the basic steps involved, right? So you onboard these templates, and then you can also onboard the logical networks that you want to allow your end users to provision their workloads against. Once you've done this, then you can create plans and offers, like I said, right? You have plans and offers in Hybr through which you can bundle these services, and then go on to define what underlying services are enabled as part of it, right? You click on vConnect here. Here you can go and
So,
say,
so Arvind, quick question. So
yeah.
this you're doing it for a single Azure Stack HCI cluster, correct?
It could be several Azure Stack HCI clusters. You can onboard all of those Azure Stack HCI clusters as connections, and then they will all appear here in your plan. And for a given customer, let's say you have a service provider scenario where, like we spoke earlier, you have Pepsi and Coke as two potential customers. Pepsi has bought 2 clusters and Coke has bought 3 other clusters. Then for Pepsi, you can create a specific plan in which you can just select the clusters that are dedicated for Pepsi here. Okay. And only those clusters will be made available for Pepsi's end users to provision against when they use the end user portal to provision.
Got it. Okay, cool.
Okay. And so you also see here a lot of other configurations, like you can define guardrails to what extent people can provision resources. In this case, they have unlimited access to the underlying infrastructure on these clusters because it's dedicated to them. But in some cases, if it's an enterprise scenario, you want to share the clusters, you might want to democratize it and then say, hey, I'm going to only allow you to provision up to 100 cores across all of your workloads within that particular cluster, right? So that way you can define all these guardrails. Then you can also even define or restrict what operations are allowed for any given end user, right? So again, depending on the context, you might want to allow them to do everything because it's a dedicated cluster for them, it's free to be used. Or you might say, hey, even if it's dedicated, it is a production environment, this plan is specific to a production environment, I'm going to not allow them to delete VMs or maybe reconfigure VMs than what is already configured, right? Then you can turn off such features, right? And then if you want to enable, say, approval workflows, where when somebody provisions a VM, you want it to automatically trigger an approval process to the immediate manager or to an IT admin or even both, then you can associate approval workflows as part of this so that it gets triggered automatically when the provisioning process is triggered, right? So these are all some of the bells and whistles that are available for an operator to define exactly how the user experience should be for the end users, right? Now, these are so good. You've onboarded the infrastructure, you've defined various plans, but how do you get your tenants onboarded? That's where you go to the customer section. Now, right now, we've configured this environment to look like that of an enterprise scenario where you have departments within an enterprise. But you could, Hybr can easily be customized to change this nomenclature from departments to companies or tenants or customers, whatever you want it to be, right? And it can easily be renamed, and then it will show as customers or companies, right? And once you've done that, at the time of setup, then you'll create a new. Imagine this new department is a new company that you're onboarding, like a Pepsi or Coke. Then you'll say create new company, and then you'll say the name is Pepsi, right? And then you'll provide the identity provider for that company. Are they going to be bringing their AAD tenant or B2C tenant? And then you can automatically onboard the users into the system, and then you can define the offer that you're mapping to this customer, which will define the subscription that they have, and so on and so forth, right? So you complete the onboarding of this tenant through the operator's portal, and once done and they subscribe to a plan, then they can go to the end user portal and start consuming all these services, right? It's as simple as that.
So this is outside of what they do typically as CSPs. They operate everything using the partner portal, which is a Microsoft partner portal.
Yeah.
So basically create new subscriptions. So after that, they can do this, right? Is my understanding right? Okay.
You're correct. So in a service provider scenario, like we spoke earlier, you are a CSP, you would have sold them an Azure subscription, and you would have sold them Azure Stack HCI and such. And then you still have to, onboard them to Hybr here, right? And then you can, in fact, for CSP, we also have an automatic, capability to onboard customers from Partner Center. So in that case, you don't even have to manually onboard them. It can automatically sync with Partner Center and bring your customers over.
That's really nice. Okay, cool.
Yeah, exactly. And once you've done this, you can have the end user go to the, let me go switch the end user portal here. This is demo.hybr.com, which is the end user portal. And in the end user portal, it can so be that, let's say I'm in an enterprise, I could potentially be part of multiple departments or want to have access to multiple departments. Then just like in Azure portal, you can switch between various tenants. You can switch between various departments right here in the tenant portal, right? Or I'm an operator, I've been given access to multiple of my tenants, environments, because I'm managing it on their behalf. Then I can, easily switch between various companies right here using the switch operation, right? And then once I've done that, if I want to be able to, look at, okay, what are the workloads that I've already provisioned, right? I can go to vConnect under the end user portal, and then I choose the virtual machines tab. It lists me all the VMs that I've already provisioned against the various underlying infrastructures. So let's take this VM for an example, which is an HCI VM. It quickly shows me the, image or what is the underlying operating system of this VM, what is the IP address assigned to it. and whether it's running or it's in stop state, and then what's the high-level configuration of this VM, right? All of that you can quickly see, and then you can go to the configure tab and then reconfigure the VM. But again, in this case, the VM is running, so there are certain operations that are not allowed when it's running. You got to shut down the VM and then reconfigure it, and then you can create snapshots against the VM. You can access, security, settings like, trusted platform launch and so on that you see in Windows Admin Center. The similar, features are available in the end user portal as well. Again, latency is a little bit poor in my environment connecting through a VPN, but this is the experience for an end user, right? Now, when it comes to creating Kubernetes clusters, you can see all the Kubernetes clusters that you've created, and it shows you which cluster you have created it against, what version of Kubernetes that is running, and is it just deployed locally or is it also integrated with Azure Arc? Then if it's integrated with Azure Arc, it even gives you a shortcut to navigate to the Azure portal. You see here in the status bar, it shows portal.azure.com. So if you click that, it'll automatically take you to the Azure portal and show you the Arc resource equivalent of it in the Azure portal. So you can manage it from there as well. And you can easily turn off Arc integration if you choose to at any time. You can delete this cluster, or you can drill into the cluster and then get an overview of the cluster details, and then be able to create node pools on the cluster, right? Or add nodes to the cluster, and so on and so forth. So that's all of the things that you can do in terms of managing Kubernetes workloads can be done right from here through the Kubernetes screen. And then you can also, as an operator, right, particularly have access to all of these. This is some of the things that we recently built. We built the ability to query the metrics data across your infrastructure, right? Be it at the cluster level, be it at the node level, cluster node level, or be it for the Kubernetes clusters or the virtual machines, right? You are able to track the CPU utilization, memory utilization, storage utilization across all of these levels, and then be able to see those trends as well, right, through this rich dashboarding and reporting capability. And we have some out-of-the-box, dashboards created for you that you can leverage. But if you want to create a new one, you could very well do that as well, right? You can say new dashboard and then go about creating a new one. Or you can even edit any of the existing dashboards that we created for you and then change the layout of these, maybe move something up or down, or change the chart types or something else. You see all of these options right here for you. Think of it like a Power BI experience, right, where you can change the look and feel by yourself and customize it to suit your own needs. So all of that is possible right here. And you can pick the various, in this case it's showing the clusters belonging to this particular department, and then it's showing the this is the total memory capacity allocated for the cluster node versus what is actually being utilized, right? And then I have few other sample reports here, similarly showing the memory utilization over a period of time for this particular host machine, this node. And then in this case, it is showing the cluster level metrics, performance trends for various metrics, right? So here I have the ability to monitor the cluster node level memory or the cluster node level CPU, and at the storage level, you can see for each volume what is the size, what is the throughput, and so on. You can turn on any of these metrics, and then it shows up automatically, in the chart below, right? So that's the power that you have, in terms of using these dashboards and reports as well. And besides the dashboarding feature, there's also a reports feature, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's say you want to, create an automated report at the end of every day, and then have it sent to a bunch of admins for them to keep a track of what the infrastructure capacity utilization is, because they don't want to come to the portal all the time and look at it. They want to get end of the day mails. Particularly IT managers would want such a feature, right? So you could create reports here, which you can schedule to be generated at a certain time. Let me just click here. Yep. In this case, it says it's monthly, the first day of the month. It will generate it at 10 a.m. and then it's going to be generating between this start date and this end date, which is like for the month of January, this report was configured to be created, right? And then once it's configured like that, it will automatically generate reports based on that, right? If you go to generated reports, if it had generated reports, it will show there. And then you can also configure properties such as who do you want, whether this report is only to be shown to the administrators, or even the end user should be able to see this report, right? So again, if you have dedicated clusters to your customers, then chances are you also want to be able to make this report available for the tenants. So then you can turn it on for the tenants, and then the tenants will only be able to see the utilization reports for the clusters that they own, right? So these features are also available. And then in the end user portal, you have the same dashboards and reports, like I said, from where they can consume the report specific to the clusters that they have access to.
So,
just
quick
pause here.
question, Arvind.
Yeah.
So, have you exposed any APIs for, let's say, for example, the third-party applications? If they want to kind of consume your APIs, have you exposed any APIs at all?
Absolutely.
Let's say, okay.
So I know Hybr has REST APIs that one can consume, and
Okay.
you can easily like say for example you want to query the billing data out of Hybr and integrate it with the downstream platform. You can easily consume it through the REST API. In fact, we even have Zapier based integrations and webhooks based integrations, so that even if you have say some business process workloads you want to easily enable, wherein if a VM gets provisioned, you want to automatically send a notification to some downstream system, you could use
Mhm.
the Zapier integration mechanisms or webhook-based integration mechanisms to achieve any of those.
Okay, this is really useful. That's great. One last question I do have
Yeah.
though. I'm not sure you showed that screen before.
Yeah.
Sorry, pardon my
Sure.
ignorance. But creation of specific costing profiles, is it something
Yeah.
that you showed demoed already, or?
No, I can show that to you quickly
Okay.
here. So, if, as an operator, for you to decide how you want to charge your customers for your Azure Stack HCI services, you would be going to the operators portal and then configuring the pricing for your HCI services, right? So you go under the billing section of the operators portal, and then go to the pricing tab. It displays here various pricing configurations. We were simulating an enterprise scenario where there are different departments, and different departments might have different pricing configurations. So we created these, departments to simulate a banking client. And for each, each department you can have their own, pricing configurations, right? So you can edit this. It'll say, if I want to charge a flat fee, for offering these services and then charge my end customers a flat fee every month, irrespective of whether they consumed anything or not, then I can optionally set the monthly fee. But if it is like Azure, which is like pure consumption-based billing, then you can simply set it as 0, right? And you wouldn't charge any flat fees besides the ongoing usage charges. Similarly, there's also an option to specify a one-time fee, wherein the first time they subscribe to a plan, you can charge them a fee. Again, these are depending on the customer scenarios, and every customer has a certain process, right, and certain investment they make. So some customer will say, hey, for the cost, there's a cost associated with onboarding a customer for me. There's a cost associated with running this service on an ongoing basis if they remain subscribed, right? That is above and beyond what they're actually consuming. In such cases, you could use these mechanisms to configure those. But importantly, for you to do true meter-based billing, you see there are various parameters here. Let me just filter by say Kubernetes, right? When you just type Kubernetes here, KUB here, it automatically filters me all the Kubernetes related meters that are available for me out of the box. And you could charge back your Kubernetes service through any of these meters, right? It could be just the 1 meter, or it could be several meters. That it's totally up to you how you want to charge back. Some customers might want to keep it simple and say, I want to understand how Azure does, AKS billing for public cloud. I want to just mimic that in Hybr. Then we can show them how to do that, and we'll let them pick the right meters and then configure the pricing that will mimic the Azure public cloud. So that is a simple story for them as a service provider, right? They can say, hey, you know what? You don't have to necessarily use Azure. You get the data sovereignty in terms of running it in Azure Stack HCI in your own region or whatever. But then we'll offer the same AKS service just like how Azure offers it for say $100 a month. You could consume it for the same service in with our HCI infrastructure as well, right? So in order to be able to make such a pricing decision and communicate pricing in that way, you want the platform to be also able to support it, and Hybr can precisely enable that. So let me show you quickly, what a pricing configuration for a meter looks like. Let's say in this case, we want to use the CPU cores as a metric to charge a customer. What it essentially says here is, we want to charge $10 per month for every core that is used in a Kubernetes cluster. Let's say somebody provisions a Kubernetes cluster with 2 nodes, and then each node contains 4 cores, CPU cores. Then in total, the cumulative consumption in the cluster would be 8 cores, right? So they would be charged $80 for that month if that Kubernetes cluster and both of the nodes were running through the entire month. Whereas if it is running only for say 15 days of the month, then the charges will be prorated accordingly. So that's the simple math here. And again, there are lots of bells and whistles here. You could even say, irrespective of the consumption, I want to charge a minimum fee of $10, right, or $5. So it means if you've used it for the first half of the month continuously, and then only if you cross the threshold after 15 days, you will get to be charged on the usage-based pricing. But for the first 15 months of usage, irrespective of whether you use it for 1 day or 2 days or few hours, you'll be charged $5, right? That's what this minimum monthly fee can enable you. And then in addition, you could also provide some conditions, and filter properties, right? You could say, I want to apply this pricing only for those Kubernetes clusters whose name starts with a pattern like ABC star, right? Because you might have some naming conventions in a company which designates some special types of workloads, and you want to charge differently for such workloads. Then you can use the properties of that resource, such as its name or whatever else, or the SKU size or whatever, and accordingly filter the pricing to only apply to such workloads which match that naming condition. And so which means you can create different meters for different combinations as a result.
So for an end user, is there a provision to pay up the billing? Is there a payment methodologies incorporated in the tenant portal as well?
Yes, our solution enables you to, as an end user, view invoices at the end of the month, and then optionally you can turn on integration with payment gateways, so that if they want to be able to pay through a credit card at the end of the month through a payment gateway integration, they could do that as well.
That's fascinating. That's awesome.
So, for example, we have integrated with Stripe. We've integrated with Cyber Source, Visa, based protocol. We've integrated with local payment gateway providers in different regions of the world. For example, there are a couple of payment gateways we integrated with for a customer in Africa, and then different payment gateways for a customer in India. So depending on the region, some customers might have different payment gateway requirements. And sometimes we, depending on what it is and how easy it is, we might do it for a fee to add that integration for the customer, or we'll let them do it themselves by using Zapier or whatever approach, right? So again, these are things that they can do.
That's really nice. I know we're having a lot of conversations around costing and profiling, because that's going to be of tremendous interest for CSPs, I'm sure. One last question, I promise. So let's say, for example, a cloud service provider would have invested initial capital expenditure on the infrastructure, right? Now, do you provide some pricing guidelines so that they can price accordingly, for example, particular VM or a Kubernetes cluster? Is there a way that you provide some kind of calculations or guidelines around, hey, this is your capital expenditure, how can you monetize? What is the monetization value that you're looking at? Is it available today, or?
It is again, we like to understand the specifics at the customer's level, but I'll give you an example of a customer in Australia, right, that had a similar requirement recently, not necessarily for Azure Stack HCI, but for Azure Stack Hub. And there are similarities between both the platforms in terms of how you monetize. So I'll take that example. And in that case, what they did was, what they said was, hey, you know what, I want to be able to track the consumption of resources in Azure Stack Hub, and then be able to charge them based on actual consumption. And in addition, I have made these infrastructure investments, and I've made these capital expenses that I want to also recoup. So what they decided was, they will charge for every core of utilization of capacity on a given month. Let's say for VM, they'll charge for the VM services. But in addition, we also help them configure the hardware pricing as well on a per core basis, which can be added on to their software costs, right? So as a result, in their bill, they'll see two line items: one for the VM's consumption and then the associated cost, and the one for prorating the capital expenses that they've incurred, either in terms of Dell infrastructure or in terms of, say, some other value-added solutions that they've deployed, like backup service, this service, that service, or some SQL service, whatnot, right? They can bring in all of those costs together and then discuss with us what those costs are, how they want to recoup it. Every customer might have their own formula. In this case, the customer said, for every CPU, I want to keep a simple price that I want to charge for the hardware, and we built it that way. And again, the system is so flexible. If a different customer has a different way that they want to charge for these hardware using a custom formula, we can easily integrate that into our solution as well. Okay.
Awesome. Cool. So I think it's probably the right time to kind of wrap up. But Aravind, just quickly, if I want you to quickly summarize the value proposition of the multi-tenancy feature of Hybr on Azure Stack HCI.
So I'd say, if you are a service provider that are scratching your head, or you're you need help in finding out, hey, you know what, I want to bring the goodness of Azure Stack HCI to my customers. I want to be able to operate this infrastructure for my customers, but at the same time, I want to let them use the self-service portal and provision and manage their workloads. And how do I do all of that with, in a seamless fashion through a platform that I can just simply, consume it from the cloud, and then integrate with my infrastructure and then get going in a matter of hours or days, right? Hybr can come in there. And if you want to go one step more and then say, I want to track consumption of those resources, I want to charge back my customers, and so on, again, Hybr can come in and then help you. So if you're thinking about, how do I do multi-tenancy on Azure Stack HCI? How do I charge back my customers for Azure Stack HCI?
Yeah.
Or how do I want to offer Azure Stack HCI in addition with my other legacy infrastructure like Hyper-V or VMware and so on, and then give a single pane of glass experience with full-fledged billing and all that, then Hybr is your go-to solution for that.
Awesome. So, Aravind, one last question. So, what's the best way, let's say, for example, our service providers or any of the customers want to reach out to you? What's the best way to, engage with Cloud Assert team?
So, you could all the time, visit us at cloudassert.com. There is special pages for Azure Stack HCI and our offerings related to that, or multi-cloud in general. You could go to any of those pages and there'll be, you'd see prominent links there to contact us at any time or ask us questions. And that's the best way to, learn about our products and to reach out to us. You can, of course, write to us at info@cloudassert.com as well. And one of us will quickly respond to you within 24 hours and then, help you with whatever questions you might have. And we are also available in, social media like LinkedIn, Facebook and YouTube and so on. So you can get access to our channels. You can see our company postings in LinkedIn. You can always reach out to us through any of our company pages or whatever in LinkedIn as well. So there are multiple channels. Of course, Twitter is also one of them, or X, I should say. So you could reach out to us in any of the social media channels or LinkedIn or our own public cloud website.
Yep. So I'm going to leave those links in the comment section so that you can actually make use of this.
Yep. And we'll also share you some recordings of more full-fledged demos if you're interested in seeing them.
That will be awesome.
The features, then we'll share you those links as well.
All right. So time to kind of wrap up. Aravind, thank you so much. It's been truly very, very informative session, at least for me. I learned a lot. I'm sure our service providers would have learned a lot as well watching this video. So thank you so much for your time and coming over and showing some really cool demos and also talking about the value proposition of the multi-tenancy feature with Hybr on Azure Stack HCI.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure yet again. And I'd love to be back, later this year when there are more exciting things that we're building in Hybr. I would love to, share that with your audience.
Awesome. Hey, thank you so much, Aravind. And thank you so much to all our listeners listening to this podcast. If you really like this video, please feel free to subscribe, like, and share. We're going to come up with more videos with Aravind as his company is doing more and more innovations around the multi-tenancy and all of those cool features with Hybr.